Hello everyone, and we are live. It is Monday. It is Monday the 30th of April, and I will be doing a few replays today for what I'm going to start calling Masters Monday. I have three different replays that are all Masters level or higher, but not professional level replays that have been submitted to me from various areas. These three were all submitted to me on Team Liquid. So for everyone who's been following me on my blog on Team Liquid, thank you. And thank you for the replays you guys have been sending me. They've been very, very helpful. So without further ado, let's get into our first replay today. It is a Masters level replay coming to me from the European ladder. It will be a PvT on Ohana ladder edition. This is actually my first PvT I've casted on this map. Haven't really had much opportunity to do very much with this map at all. I think I only had one gold level replay that I casted on Saturday. So we have, spawning in the top location of the map Ohana Ladder Edition, we have the red Terran player Naga. And in the bottom position we have the blue Protoss player Tormentor, which is basically Tormentor without the R. Both of these players are Masters level players. Naga, our red Terran player, is actually a rank 32 Masters, and Tormentor is a rank 81 Masters. This is off of StarCraft 2 ranks. I'm not sure how updated it is, but it should give you a general idea of what kind of play we should be seeing out of our players. Alright, now the thing about Ohana is that Ohana is obviously a two-person map, and it is a two-person map that has fewer bases than a map like Cloud Kingdom or Daybreak does. And the map is actually somewhat narrow. It's actually somewhat small, in kind of like vertically. It's a vertical map, obviously, but it's kind of narrow in terms of how much ground and how much terrain there is horizontally. So what that actually means is that the attack paths and the paths like through the middle are very limited. There's really only two general attack paths through the middle, and both of them are able to be covered by this watchtower. This brush obviously provides a line of sight blocker for like siege units in the middle or something like that. And the bases, the fifth bases for both players, are actually located very, very close to the middle of the map. So these are the general terrain features of Ohana that really dictate a certain type of play from both players. It's very friendly to mech if you're going for mech sort of play for Terran, but obviously mech play is not very popular against Protoss. And in general, this tends to lend itself very nicely to the Protoss Deathball style. Why? Well, because one of the biggest weaknesses with the Protoss Deathball style is the fact that the army is really only very powerful if you keep it all together. It doesn't like to be split apart from each other because the units are at their most effective when they're able to synergize with each other. Well, on this map, because you're able to take control basically of the watchtower and can pretty much control where, or at least observe where your opponent's army is moving across the middle of the map, it really kind of allows the death ball to stay together and block off any sort of flank attempt that you can do with it. So for that reason, in my opinion, just because of the typical army styles that you will see out of both players, and the fact that the number of bases on this map is very small, you can only take really a maximum of 5 per player per side. I think this map tends to favor Protoss a little bit in the TvP matchup. I will also go as far to say that it actually kind of somewhat favors Terran mech play against Zerg in the TvZ matchup, but this isn't a TvZ, so that information is a little irrelevant. Okay, so we do have a gaseous expand going down for our red Terran player. He is banking another 300 minerals, possibly for 2 additional barracks that he will probably throw down in conjunction with this. We have our warp gate and a stalker coming out for our Protoss player, and he is going for his nexus right now. So once again, we have a gaseous expand versus a 1-gate expand. This is the most standard opening that you will see out of both players. Okay, but another interesting thing about this matchup is that this is one of very few maps that actually has a secondary entrance leading into the natural expansion. So what that means is that normally these bunkers would really be able to deter most types of early aggression against your gaseous expand. But the presence of this back door allows for a wider variety of early game attacks to punish the gaseous expand from the Terran. And very similarly, if this Terran was opening for a type of 2 racks type build,
These rocks over on this side would actually allow for a secondary door in. So it really kind of disallows or discourages very types of greedy play from both players in the early game, because the presence of this back door really kind of limits or allows for additional types of openings in the early game. We did see the Protoss player just picking away at those rocks just a little bit. We have a robotics facility and an additional gateway going down for our Protoss, so this will be a 1-gate expand into a 3-gate robo. Once again, the most standard opening you can do in TvP. Now, the reason why you always want to go for this robotics facility after your cybernetics core, especially if you're going for a later type macro play, is because you really need these observers out. You don't really need this robotics facility for immortals as much as you need them for observers. You really want to know what your Terran opponent is up to. All you see is this bunker. You don't really know what kind of unit composition your opponent's going for, if he's going for a big Doom drop, some type of mech play, or really if he's just going for the standard bio composition following that, or if he has double engineering base down, or anything of the sort. And Protoss doesn't have any other scouting option other than these observers, so you need to get this robotics facility down as soon as you possibly can. So the 3-gate robo is actually the best, really. It's the best opening you can do following a 1-gate expand, which is why so many Protoss players do it. For the Terran, we do have Stimpack going down. We have a factory with a reactor being built on one of the barracks. This factory will probably not be used for very much. You will probably build a starport and use the factory to construct a reactor. Once again, I'm really just describing the super standard play from both players in this matchup for higher level play. The reason why it is so standard is because it is so good. This is the type of play that with the fewest weaknesses in the early game and the most benefit in the late game for both players. Now, the one thing that's really going to start picking up is what our Terran's going to do once those medevacs are on the field, or once Stim is on the field. It looks like the Terran will be moving out before those medevacs are out, timed up with that Stim pack, so he will probably have Stim by the time he reaches the front of his opponent's base. But the Protoss player will be prepared for this. He does have multiple sentries down on the field, and he does see that this army is in fact moving out. This army is probably just looking to take control of at least one of the watchtowers, just a spot for early types of immortal busts or something similar. Now, once again, one of the things about this map is this back door. So this back door is going to make it more difficult for the Protoss player to hold his natural expansion with those sentries. But both ramps are, however, very narrow. That is only about 2 force fields across to block it from units being able to come up it. So it's really going to come down to whether the Protoss is comfortable opening this back door up to his opponent. It looks like he is. And I think he'll be pretty safe with those sentries from any kind of early attack from the Terran until those medevacs are out. Those medevacs actually make a big difference, though, because the medevacs allow the Terran army to shoot back up at the Protoss army from the low ground, even if force fields are down here blocking vision from the ground units. The presence of those medevacs will provide a sight bonus to the ground units that will allow them to shoot back up from the low ground, and because the Terran army is entirely made up of ranged units and the Protoss army still requires zealots to do some of its damage, that actually gives our Terran player a little bit of an advantage, but with this Colossus out on the field, that advantage is no longer really present. So we are still just waiting to see what the Terran is going to be doing. He doesn't really want to let his Protoss player get out a huge Colossus count, and actually I don't even know if he scanned his opponent at all. No, he hasn't. He really only knows that 3-gate robo is down. He doesn't know if he's following up with a Twilight Council for Templar build or if he's going straight into Colossus play. That's kind of a sloppy thing from our Terran. You really want to scan your Protoss opponent around a certain time period. I'm really not sure what the exact timing is, but you really want to at least get some information on your opponent, find out what kind of build he's going for, and whether you're going to be up against High Templar first or Colossus first, because that's going to determine what you're going to be building to counter it. He hasn't started Viking production yet, so he has absolutely nothing out on the field right now that can really counter the presence of those Colossus. This drop will be spotted by this pylon that will allow our Protoss opponent to move back his army over to counter this drop. He is warping in Stalkers over on this side, but that is only 2 Stalkers. He might not be able to do very much about this drop. This drop could cause some damage. The drop is actually dropping in the base now. He does see that that double forge is down, but that Colossus is there. He's going to try and snipe the Colossus, but I don't think he thinks he can get it, so he is backing up into the corner. He is going to unpower those forges temporarily, and he is going to lift off. That wasn't very much damage the Terran did do with that drop, but he did manage to make it out with some of his units, so it's actually not that big of a deal that he didn't do that much damage, but he does now know that Colossus are out on the field. He does know that he is following it up with a double forge build, which is usually indicative of a type of late game focus from our Protoss player. So with that, he is now constructing a secondary starport. He is starting Viking production. So we are going to be moving into a later game type scenario from both players. Both players are now taking their third base. The Protoss player already has his Nexus down, and this Terran will be landing his command center over here, so they are very even in economy. We have 67 workers for the Terran and 65 for the Protoss, but the Protoss will be able to construct a lot more workers thanks to Chrono Boost and the addition of that third Nexus. So both the economies for both players are very similar. The tech for both players are very similar. The one big difference right now is the presence of that double forge for upgrades. The Terran player only has one engineering bay as far as I know yet. It only looks like he has one engineering bay. He is constructing a second one, but if you are going to be going for the late game against Protoss, you need to get upgrades up sooner. The reason why is because Chrono Boost allows Protoss to start upgrading their army much quicker than you can. We do have already +1 attack finish, +1 armor will be finishing shortly. The only reason why it isn't done already is because he did snipe that pylon, so that did unpower that forge for a moment. The Protoss army is moving out on the map right now. That is a pretty scary army. That is a 78 supply Protoss army with 4 Colossus and an Immortal in there somewhere. He's probably waiting for charge before he actually decides he wants to move out on the map. The Terran has made this base a planetary fortress, so he's pretty safe at the moment too, and it looks like he's going to be moving out on the map too. The vision for both players is not very good. Neither one really knows where their opponent's army is and what their opponent's army is comprised of. They are really just expecting each side to play very, very standard from here on out. So the Protoss is advancing over to the left side of the map. He wants to check to see if there's an expansion over there. He does verify there is in fact no expansion on this side of the map, so he does know that the expansion is over here and that his opponent is on a maximum of 3 bases, which is very good information for the Protoss to know. Both sides are actually really even at this point. The Protoss isn't really using Chrono Boost as effectively as he could be. Those upgrades should be further along than they are, but with the Templar Archives down, it will allow him to go on to additional tech from here. It looks like we may have an engagement. This positioning does in fact favor our Protoss player. Everything is very, very bunched up, but those Vikings will be able to take down that heavy Colossus count, but not before the Terran Bio army does take a lot of damage in casualties. He is retreating back to the presence of that planetary. That will force the Protoss back, and in this retreat, those Vikings are going to be able to pick off at least one Colossus. Will they get a second or a third? It looks like they might. The second Colossus does go down, but the third one is still alive. The Terran Bio is cleaning up those Zealots. They are forcing the Protoss army back, and the Terran is taking an advantage. He is up in supply. He needs to utilize this advantage that he just took. He sniped down multiple Colossus. That will give his Bio army a very strong advantage over the Protoss Gateway army that is lacking in the splash damage that it vitally needs to deal with those Bio units. There are Archons coming down on the field, but I really think that the Terran has an advantage right now. He needs to utilize it. If he lets the Protoss player rebuild that army, he will be throwing away the advantage that he just took in that engagement. He needs to do something. Dude, do you really want to have to fight that army over again with Archons thrown in the mix this time? You really don't. Psionic Storm is almost done. The 4th base is almost done. The Terran is playing very, very passively. He does see that 4th base is going down. That will probably prompt him into some aggression. He needs to move out. You need to move out, dude. Come on, move out. All right, here he goes. He is moving out on the map. He's probably going to go for that 4th base. That scan that he threw down did prompt the Protoss player to move his army over on this side of the map. They will be running into each other, and if the Protoss player manages to engage him on the top of this ramp, that will give him a pretty good advantage over his opponent. Those Vikings are now being revealed by that pylon. The Protoss does know that his base is going to be attacked. He does have Psionic Storm though, and with Psionic Storm and that Colossus with no Ghost out on the field, I don't know how this is going to work out. He is going for that Nexus. Storm does go down. That it's a pretty good dodge. Second Storm goes down. That does do a lot of damage. Those Archons are thrown in the mix now. That Colossus has been burned down. And it looks like the superior supply of our Terran player is going to allow him to take advantage of that army. But here comes the Warpin. Additional Zealots are coming in. They are pushing back this Terran army. There are no more Psionic Storms available, but those Zealots are doing a lot of damage to our Terran player. He is pushing back this attack. This attack looks like it's going to be cleaned up by our Protoss player. He does save this Nexus. That is a huge, huge deal. This army is just going to be pushed back. We have 10 Marines in production for our Terran player, and with the saving of this Nexus, the Protoss does have a superior economy. He does have a lot of warp gates down on the field. It will allow him to reinforce his army much quicker than the Terran can, and the Terran isn't really making too much in the way of Marauders. He doesn't have a Ghost Academy down on the field just yet. He needs Ghosts right now. Oh, excuse me, he does have a Ghost Academy down on the field. Okay, so he needs to utilize Ghost to counter the High Templar, and he needs to continue making sure that he does have some Vikings out on the field to counter the Colossus, but the Colossus count is much lower than it was in the past. He needs to not overcommit to Vikings. He needs just enough to make sure that he's able to take down this Colossus. Here comes a secondary engagement, but that is not enough bio to deal with those Archons. Those Archons are going to be pushing back that Terran army, especially with the presence of that Colossus. The Terran needs to get out of there. He can't do too much damage to this army. He's not actually killing any of the expensive tech units. Yes, he does. He does manage to get one Archon, but he can't afford to lose these medevacs. Those medevacs are a lot more expensive and a lot more valuable. They are very difficult to replace compared to that Terran bio army. The Terran is moving over onto this side of the map. He wants to clear out these pylons so he can get his fourth base established, but the Protoss does know about that. He is going to warp in a little bit just to delay this expansion even further. In my opinion, the Terran needs to double expand. He needs to take additional expansions all over the map and needs to flood his opponent with more bio units. We have more Colossus coming out on the field. He is producing a third one and another Immortal. +3 weapon attacks has finished for our Protoss player. +2 armor, +3 armor is almost done, and he is also starting his plasma shield upgrades. So our Protoss is doing a very good job with his upgrades at this point in the game. He does have additional High Templar waiting for energy for Storm, and honestly right now I think the Protoss is slightly ahead. He does have 5 more workers, but that's not really all that important right now. What's more important is the presence that he has additional bases, so that if the game goes much further, he will not be mined out as badly as his Terran opponent will probably be. His Terran opponent has, however, taken that 4th base. He will probably be able to turn this into a planetary. This is a very difficult position to deal with on this map, if that is actually a planetary. It is a high ground expansion with a small ramp that is able to be blocked off with Terran bio units at the top, and the presence of that planetary at the end does give them a position to fall back to. Protoss is actually, some of the same mind about this position. He has constructed photon cannons over on this side, as well as a proxy pylon over here to reinforce. Both sides are almost maxed out. The Terran is maxed out over his opponent. He needs to move out before his Protoss opponent does manage to get maxed out, but that's not going to be that doesn't give him very much time right now. His ghost count's actually pretty high. He does have 13 ghosts out on the field. That is a lot of ghosts. That should allow him to deal with those Archons and those High Templar very easily, but the Protoss player is moving out on the map. He will be able to hit this expansion. The Terran is on the opposite side. Will we see an expansion trade? We might. The Protoss army has been revealed. Is the Terran going to go over to flank it? No. He's going straight for the Protoss' 4th base. He doesn't care that he loses his 4th base of his own, but he did lose a lot of workers over there. The Protoss is definitely going to lose this expansion. There are no troops over on this side of the map to deal with this, so both expansions are going down. Both players have been reduced down to 3 bases, but here comes the Protoss army. It is moving out over on this side of the map. He will be able to engage the Terran army on top of where his 4th base was. But I think this positioning favors the Terrans slightly. Here comes the engagement. The armies are clashing with each other. That is a great position for those Vikings. They will be able to deal with those Colossus unharassed. EMPs have gone down. A lot of Archons have already been killed. The Storm does go down, though. That is a good Storm. It did do a lot of damage to that army. Those Vikings are going down, but the Terran is losing most of his bio army, but the Protoss doesn't have much either. This is a really, really even engagement, but the Terran is coming out slightly ahead. Those Immortals aren't very good at dealing with those Marines, but here comes additional Zealots. Those Zealots might be able to take care of it, but a good EMP does go down on those Zealots, burning them of all their shields, so those Zealots are taken care of. The Terran is making 11 more Marines and 3 more Vikings, and actually, this might actually be the decisive engagement on this map. Those Marines are going to be able to unpower a lot of those gateways, but a Storm does go down. He needs to get those Marines out of there. If he's able to unpower these gateways, that might give him the opportunity that he needs to come way ahead in this game, but he's not actually microing those Marines. That Storm is going to weaken that Marine army enough for those Zealots to clean it up, and we are now going to stabilize. Both sides did take a lot of damage in that attack. A lot of damage. They have been reduced down to 3 bases for each. The Terran's natural is mined out. He doesn't have very many resources left at his 3rd base, so both sides have been reduced to really just 1 mining base. They are mined out of their natural bases. They need to take a 4th. The Terran is reestablishing his 4th base, and he's actually making a 5th base. But this pylon does see that 5th base attempt. He probably will be able to warp in a couple Zealots to take care of that SCV and halt the production of that base. He is moving out again on the map. He doesn't have any ghosts in this army, though. He does have Vikings for Colossus, but a bigger problem for him right now is those Archons. He has no ghosts to deal with those Archons, but if he manages to get this Nexus, that might not matter. Here comes the Terran army. They will be taking care of that Nexus. He needs to snipe it and get out of there. He doesn't know that this army is coming, but he will shortly. Here comes the Protoss army. Those are a lot of Archons to deal with those Marines, but he is getting himself back into a choke, and a Storm does go down. That is probably going to clear off most of it, and he does. He manages to snipe all those medevacs. That Terran is now completely without a military. He is now down to 100 supply, but our Protoss doesn't have very much in supply either. These two have hit each other so hard, and good feedback. Great feedback. The Terran was trying to snipe that Nexus, and the feedback does kill the medevac, saves that Nexus. He needs that Nexus for additional income. And we still haven't seen any sort of reprisal from the Protoss. Actually, I think we did, because that SCV only has 5 hit points left. So these guys are very, very badly wounded, both of them, but the Protoss army is actually starting to regain those high-tech units that they need. There are 2 Colossus down, and I think that is 6 Archons. Yeah, 6 Archons. So the Protoss army is pretty scary. The Terran army isn't quite as scary. There's only 15 Marines, no Marauders, 4 Ghosts, 6 Vikings, and 3 Medevacs. So our Protoss player does have a superior army right now, but he's not actually going to be able to hurt the Terran very much with those planetary fortresses out, which obviously is going to boost the defensive capabilities of the Terran army rather significantly. We now do have a Zealot over on this side, is trying to deny that 5th base. Terran needs to get rid of that Zealot. He wants that 5th base, but here comes the Protoss army to deny that 4th base. This base is much more important because it is fully saturated. He can't lose this base. Where is the Terran army? He is getting a mass repair down on that planetary, but I think that is just too much damage. When with the Storm taking down those SCVs, the Terran does lose that 5th base. That is a huge blow to our Terran player. He is now down to just 1 mining base with a very small army, and that is probably going to be it. He has 83 supply. He has lost both of his expansions. He is now into 1 mining base. Our Protoss does have this expansion, is giving him a small amount of income, and the 3rd base is almost mined out. But with the presence of this very large, very scary Archon-heavy Protoss army, I don't actually think our Terran's going to be able to hold this. He doesn't have any Vikings for those Colossus. Those Colossus are probably going to be what ends up winning this game for this Protoss. A lot of EMPs do go down. Those Archons are all very, very wounded, but the presence of those Storms and those Colossus will probably force a GG from our Terran opponent. We should be seeing a GG pretty soon. Will we be seeing it pretty soon? Probably will. No GG. He is actually just going to rage quit out with a balance complaint down at the end there. Okay, so our Terran player did actually have the opportunity to win that game decisively. He won a very large engagement over on this side of the map, the biggest engagement that we had in this game. Had he been able to unpower all of these gateways, that would have given him the opportunity to remake a lot of his army, to come down and finish off what the Protoss had left. But there are a few critiques I have of this Terran player. He did have Vikings over here. I didn't even see these. Those Vikings would have been really useful for dealing with those Colossus at his 3rd base, don't you think? Okay, one of the things about PvT, and like I was saying at the very beginning of this cast, the Protoss Deathball style is at its most powerful when the army is able to stay together. When it's able to keep all of the army together, the Archons with the High Templar for the Psionic Storm, with the Colossus, with the Charge Lots, all underneath a single sentry's Guardian Shield, that is when it's at its most powerful, because all of the units synergize very, very well together. If you're able to start spreading it out a little bit, well then the army isn't as effective, because it needs the presence of all of that splash with the tanking Zealots to be at its most effective. Terran bio armies aren't quite like that. You really only need 2 drop ships full of Marines and Marauders with 2 medevacs to really level an entire Protoss base. So how do you spread out the Protoss bio army? Well, you do multi-pronged attacks. And the Terran was really focused on really just single-pronged attacks. They were very powerful attacks, but he was playing into the strengths of the Protoss late-game strategy. They want single, massive engagements. That's what they like. But that's the thing about this map. This map makes it very, very difficult to do that because there isn't exactly very much room to maneuver medevacs. So the map kind of plays into the way that the Protoss wants to play the late game, but I still think that our Terran player had a great opportunity to win that game if he managed to take out these pylons and managed to deny this base. The problem really was that he didn't really have too many Marauders left after that fight was over. Marines aren't quite as good as killing buildings as Marauders are. If those had been Marauders there instead of Marines, he definitely would have taken down all these pylons, potentially this Nexus. Had he managed to destroy this Nexus, there's no doubt in my mind that he would have won that game. So that was a pretty good game. Pretty solid game from our Masters level European players. I'm happy I got to cast that. I will be back in a few minutes with another replay.